Okay, students. So now we move on to the second type of biological process taking place in the human body, that is the process of respiration. So when we say process of respiration, what do you remember normally? It is the inhaling and exhaling process that we know that we are doing all the time. So that is actually part of the respiration process. So here if we look at the respiration process in humans, it is a complex process. It has many different processes combined together and it occurs in 3 stages. And the first stage is what we know that is happening. That is the exchange of gas and substances between the environment and the lungs. So that is the first stage of respiration. So here if we write down the first stage, it is the exchange of gases and waste materials between the lungs and the environment. After that happens, now we said gases and the waste materials. So the gases that are taken in from the atmosphere has to be given to the body. So for that to happen, from the lungs, the gas has to be exchanged to the blood. And waste materials that have been collected from the body should be given into the lungs so that it can be exchanged with the environment. So the next stage or the second stage of respiration is the gas exchange taking place inside the lungs or in the alveoli of the lungs. So the second one is the gas exchange in the alveoli. So after this happens, now one of the main reasons for respiration taking place is to provide energy for the function of the human body. So you know how nutrients are obtained or given supplied to the body through consuming food and the digestion process, and after digestion the digested substances are absorbed into the bloodstream and they are circulated throughout the body, and one of the main components that provides energy to our body, what is that? That is a carbohydrate and it is a monosaccharide, it is glucose. But can we get the energy directly from glucose? No. The glucose has to undergo the cellular respiration so that it can be broken down and energy can be released. So that is the third stage of respiration, cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. So intake of oxygen into lungs. So here I said gases and waste materials are exchanged. So oxygen is taken in, that is a gas, and removal of gaseous waste. Carbon dioxide, water vapor, all these are gaseous waste in cells occur in external gas exchange. So this is the first step, that is the external gas exchange. Gas exchange between the external environment and the lungs. Now we will see how this process takes place. To understand this external gas exchange, we will do this activity. Activity demonstration of gas exchange using a model. So to do that, we need these materials. The first one is a bell jar. Then we need stoppers or corks to fix to the opening of the bell jar, and then we need a balloon membrane. If we don't have a balloon membrane, we can use a polythene sheet or a polythene or a balloon membrane as the membrane. Then we need to have glass tubes. Or if we have the white tube, we can use that as well. Either we use the white tube or the glass tubes are joined together to form a Y-shaped structure. And also we need to have these rubber bands. So these are the materials that we need. I will explain how we make the setup. So this is the setup. You can see here, this is the bell jar. And here we have the Y-shaped glass tube. So either you use the Y-shaped glass or you can fix the glass tubes into a Y-shaped structure. And to the two ends of these tubes, we fix two balloons. Initially, they are not inflated, and this Y glass with the balloons is connected with the bell jar using the stopper. So, if we mark, this is the bell jar and this is the stopper. So, the rest of the things you can identify. And here we have the membrane. So, it can be either the balloon rubber membrane or the polythene sheet. So, now that we have this setup made, we have to make sure that the membrane is also fixed or connected tightly with rubber bands so that it doesn't come off during the process. So, then if the setup is ready, what we do is first we try to push the membrane upwards like shown in figure A. Then you will see that the two balloons constrict. They just become very small. But when you pull the membrane down, like in figure B, you will see that the balloons will inflate. So, this process is similar to the inhaling and exhaling process. When you exhale, the gas, now these balloons are similar to the lungs of our respiratory system. The gas that is inside the lungs is given out during exhaling process. And gas fills up the lungs during the inhaling process. And this membrane is similar to the diaphragm that is present in our body. We have discussed what diaphragm is when we discuss the digestive system. And this whole thing is like the chest cavity. So here when we push the membrane up, the volume of the chest cavity, that is the bell jar volume inside this, decreases. Therefore, there is high pressure. Pressure increases within the chest cavity. Therefore, air is expelled out of the lungs. And when we pull this membrane down, that is like the diaphragm becoming flat. And this volume, the volume of the chest cavity increases. Therefore, the pressure inside it will decrease. Therefore, air will flow into the lungs. So, that is how inhaling and exhaling will take place. We can demonstrate that using this particular set. So that now you know what inhaling and exhaling processes are and what will happen to the lungs during these two processes, and you know the steps of this activity. We will do it in the lab. Okay, students. So now we are going to do this activity to observe how diaphragm supports the respiration process. That is the inhaling and exhaling processes. So to do that and to demonstrate that, I have the bell jar here. I have connected a tube. This is the respiratory tract through which air flows into the lungs. So here you can see inside there is a white tube. The main tube is like the trachea and the branches are like the bronchi. And here we have the two balloons which are similar to the lungs. So you all know when inhaling takes place, the diaphragm has to contract. The curvature of the diaphragm increases, then the pressure inside the chest cavity increases, so the air will flow out of the lungs. At that point, you can see the balloons that the lungs are contracting. When you inhale, the curvature of the diaphragm decreases, the chest cavity also the size increases, therefore the pressure decreases inside the chest cavity and air flows in. So that is what we are going to observe now. So if I lift this, the glass jar, this membrane is the diaphragm. So when I pull it, now you can see the balloons are relaxed. They are like contracted. But when I pull the diaphragm down, here you can see the balloons inflate. That is the lungs inflate when air flows in. Again you can see the lungs contracting. Again the lungs inflating and the lungs contracting. So this is how the respiration process, inhaling process works. Now the lungs have inflated. Again you can observe them contracting. So this is how inhaling and exhaling takes place within our body. Okay, students. So you saw what happened during the process. When we push the membrane up, the balloon becomes small. And when we pull the membrane down, it inflates. And the balloon becoming smaller is similar to the exhaling process. And the balloon getting inflated is similar to the inhaling process. So you were able to observe that clearly. I will write down the observations first. When the membrane is pushed up, the balloon become small. And then when the membrane is pulled down, the balloon inflates or becomes larger. So that was a very simple activity where you were able to observe what happens during inhaling and exhaling process. If we come to the discussion, This is what I explained to you all before when we discussed the method. When rubber membrane is pulled down in the above activity, so this is when you are pulling it down, that is the second part. The volume inside the bell jar increases. So as I told you all, the volume increases. So when volume increases, the pressure inside decreases. Then external gas enters and balloons get inflated. When rubber sheath is released, so when the rubber sheath is released, gas inside balloons go out as the volume of bell jar decreases. Likewise, gas exchange between external environment and lungs occurs due to changes of volume of lungs. So, if we discuss this in a little bit more detail. Initially, when this is the bell jar, we have the white tube with the lungs like this. When the membrane is pushed up, volume decreases, pressure increases, gas is pushed, or we can say exhaled, pushed up, pushed out, and that is what we call as exhaling process. On the other hand, when we have the same setup with the balloons and here. So here what happens? The volume increases, pressure decreases, so gas flows in, and that is the process of inhaling. So this is how it happens. Here the lungs become very large, inflated, while the gas or air flows in. So exhaling process and inhaling process. That is what you observe. So the system in our body that carries out this gas exchange, that is the gas exchange between the external environment and the lungs, as well as the gas exchange within the alveoli, and then the cellular respiration. That is the full respiration process. The system that is involved in this process is known as the respiratory system. Now we will see the parts of the respiratory system and their function. Function of the respiratory system. So here in this diagram you can see this is a respiratory system shown to you, and when you look at this diagram you should be able to identify all the parts shown here. This part is something familiar to you. We have discussed that with the digestive system as well. What is this first cavity? This is connected to the nose. So we inhale through the nose and air goes in, and there is a cavity that is known as the nasal cavity. So the first one is the nasal cavity, and this is the mouth opening, and food is consumed into what cavity? The buccal cavity. So this is the buccal cavity. So those are the two cavities, and both these cavities meet at this particular common region. And what is that called? That is the pharynx. So this pharynx is common to both the digestive system and the respiratory system. Then after the pharynx, now the digestive tract continues this way. You all know that this part is the epiglottis that covers the respiratory tract when food is entering into the digestive system. After that, this part is the respiratory tract. So here we have the larynx. This is the larynx. That is the larynx. Then from there is a tube-like structure you can see, that is the trachea. The trachea through which air goes in. And from this trachea, there are two main branches going. They are known as the bronchus. One is known as bronchus. When there are two, we call it the bronchi. So here, since one is shown, this is the bronchus. Then you can see the bronchus branching out into smaller tube-like structures. Those are the bronchioles. So these branchings are the bronchioles. And all these, the bronchus enters into this sac-like structure. The bronchioles are contained within that, and they again branch out, and finally there are small sac-like structures which are called the alveoli. And all these, the alveoli, the bronchioles, everything is contained within this structure. What is that called? That is the lung. Like that, we have two lungs, the right lung and the left lung. And these lungs are made up of very soft tissue because there is gas exchange taking place. Therefore, they have to be protected well. So, due to that reason, the lungs is kept between the chest cage or the rib cage. You all know our rib cage is made up of bones. What are the bones that are involved in making the rib cage? Here you can see this middle bone, which we call as the chest bone. It's a flat bone. In the middle, you can even feel it. That is the sternum. So this bone is the sternum. And these bones, the pair of bones that are coming from the vertebral column and joining with the sternum, making the rib cage, are the rib bones. So there are 12 pairs of rib bones. So all of them form the rib cage that protects the lungs. At the same time, they need to facilitate the gas exchange, inhaling and exhaling process as well. We will see how that happens. And there is another structure. Now, when we discuss the activity, you can remember there was that membrane, and the membrane was pushed up and pulled down. Similar to that membrane, there is the membranous structure here. That is also familiar to you. What did we call it in the digestive system? The diaphragm. So this is the diaphragm. That also participates in the inhaling, exhaling process. So these are the parts of the respiratory system, and when you are given a diagram, you should know to identify all the different parts. And thereafter, we will discuss how they participate in the respiratory process. So now, before we go into detail, normally if it was in the lab, we would have had a model of the respiratory system. But as I told you before also, now the technology is advanced and we have the online learning. Therefore, we will use a software, an anatomy software, to observe the parts of a respiratory system. Okay, students. So, as I told you all, now this is a human body. You can see that. And I told you all the rib cage that is made up of the rib bones. Here you can see. And this is the sternum that protects the lungs. As well as starting from here also, there is a bone protection, bony structure that protects the respiratory passage. Now, if we look at the passage, here you can see the mouth is the starting point of the digestive system. Here we have the nose, that is the starting point of the respiratory system. If we look at it in more detail, here you can see. Now, here from this part, you can observe the nasal cavity. Air enters through this and comes through the nasal cavity. At the same time, food enters through the mouth and comes to this common point. What is that called? The pharynx. And from there, from the pharynx, what do you have here? That is the larynx. Larynx is again a structure that is there in the respiratory system. This bulging part of the respiratory tract. This is the larynx. Then from the larynx, what do we have? A tube-like structure, that is the trachea. And then the trachea, what happens to the trachea? It divides into two structures. It will divide into two tubes, that is the bronchi. And then the bronchi will divide into smaller branches, which are called the bronchioles. And they will end at alveoli, small sac-like structures. All that is contained within these lungs. And the lungs are protected by the rib cage. So, this is the structure of a human respiratory system. And when you see one, you should be able to identify the different parts. Okay, students. So, you know the different parts of the respiratory system. So, here you know how to label the different parts as well. Now, then I will move on to the main parts of respiratory system. So, where does the respiratory system start, or the respiratory tract open into the environment? Through the nostrils and the nasal cavity. So, the first part of the structure that is present in the respiratory system is the nasal cavity. So, from the nasal cavity, where does air go? Into the pharynx. So, pharynx. Then after pharynx, what do we have? Larynx. From the larynx, the tube-like structure, that is the trachea. And this trachea divides into the bronchi. I told you all one is bronchus. When there is one, we call it the bronchus. When there are more than one, it's called bronchi, the plural. And the bronchi divide into smaller tubules, which are called the bronchioles. And then they branch out, and at the end of the bronchioles, there are small sac-like structures that are known as the alveoli. So, these are the main parts of the respiratory system that you need to remember. Nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli. So, all these are there and they are adapted to have efficient exhaling and inhaling process as well as efficient gas exchange. Now, we will see how this respiration process takes place in a person. Internal surface of nasal cavity is covered with mucus. You know what mucus is? A slimy substance that is present and it is produced within the respiratory system. So here the nasal cavity, that is the internal surface, is covered with mucus. And due to the presence of mucus in the nasal cavity, the lining of it is moist. So here there are a few changes that take place within the nasal cavity, and there are certain adaptations. We are inhaling air from the environment. Normally, the atmosphere, the air has to be clean, but there are many instances where there can be impurities or pollutants. There can be dust particles, there can be pathogens, and also the environment temperature is different from our body temperature. So, therefore, the air that is inhaled has to undergo certain changes. So, for that, one adaptation is the presence of mucus on the internal surface of nasal cavity. So, the lining is moist, and also there are a lot of cilia. So, if this is the nasal cavity, on this lining there are a lot of cilia and also it is moist. So, because of these, the air that is inhaled can be filtered kind. One thing, the humidity of air can be increased, that is moisture is given to air, and also due to the presence of cilia, the dust particles are prevented from entering into the respiratory system. Although they are inhaled, they go up to the nasal cavity. Thereafter, they are prevented from going in. So, normally when there is lot of dust or smoke, we close our nose to prevent that from going in. Even with that, a small amount can enter the nasal cavity. But the cilia prevent this. Numerous, lot of cilia present on the lining of the nasal cavity prevent the entering of dust as well as bacteria. So, I will read that again. Internal surface of nasal cavity is covered with mucus. Due to the presence of mucus in the nasal cavity, the lining of it is moist. There are numerous cilia present on the lining of the nasal cavity. The bacteria, dust and other waste found in inhaled air stick onto the mucus. This prevents the entry of them into the lungs. So, the main reason is to prevent the entry of these substances into lungs. And then what happens? The cilia that is present undergoes a rhythmic movement. With that, the dust particles, microorganisms, everything is given out into the environment. If there is too much of any of these only, then we sneeze. So, sneezing is also a process that sends out all these dust and other impurities that are present in inhaled air. So, by rhythmic movement of cilia, the waste materials are sent out. The materials that are collected at pharynx are removed out with saliva. So, here rhythmic movement of cilia and also saliva help to remove all the waste materials and the impurities that are present in inhaled air. So that whatever passes from the pharynx into the larynx and to the trachea, thereafter the lungs, is air that doesn't contain impurities. First, we will see what happens to the air that is inhaled inside the nasal cavity. The changes that take place when inhaled air passes through the nasal cavity. So, you already know, through the opening of the nasal cavity, that is the nostrils, we inhale air that enters into the nasal cavity. And inside there, what did we discuss? There are cilia present as well as the mucus layer, and it is also a moist surface. and inside that there are changes taking place. Now the first change is that the inhaled air is humidified or moisturized. That is the first change that takes place to inhaled air. So there are changes that take place when the inhaled air passes through the nasal cavity. Now you all know we inhale air from the atmosphere. Now this air is at the room temperature, as well as there are the foreign particles in it, and also there is a certain amount of moisture in air. But when we inhale it, in the nasal cavity, there is cilia, there is the mucus layer, as well as the lining of the nasal cavity is moist. So because of that, there are changes taking place to inhaled air. One is the inhaled air is moisturized or humidified. So the first change, the changes that take place when inhaled air passes through the nasal cavity. The first one, moisturizing or humidifying inhaled air. In addition to that, the inhaled air has to be warmed up to our body temperature. What is the reason? Let's say the environment temperature is 30 degrees, but our body temperature is 37 degrees. So then the inhaled air has to be warmed up to 37 degrees Celsius. That is the next change. Inhaled air is warmed up to body temperature. In addition to that, there can be foreign matter. When we say foreign matter or foreign particles, the dust particles, other substances, those can be there. Those also have to be removed. So removal of foreign particles. So these are the three changes. The changes that take place when inhaled air passes through the nasal cavity. Moisturizing or humidifying inhaled air is warmed up to body temperature, and removal of foreign particles. So let's say the dust particles are removed and they are retained, they dissolve in the mucus, and also when the cilia moves, they are just given out of the nasal cavity. Or else they dissolve in mucus, mix with mucus, and they go into the pharynx, and then through the digestive system they are removed. So either way they are not allowed into the trachea. So they are removed from the inhaled air. So lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. So the lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. This part of your body is the thoracic cavity. That is where the inhaled air is going to go. So thoracic cavity, again here thoracic cavity is protected by ribs. So we say the rib cage. The heart, the lungs, all these are contained within the rib cage. What is that made up of? There is the bone that is called the breastbone or the chest bone, which is the sternum, a plate-like bone-like structure, and the rib bones. So all these together form the rib cage, and behind we have the backbone. So they protect all these parts, and that is the thoracic cavity. And intercostal muscles are present within ribs. So if we take the rib cage you all can remember the rib bones are there, 12 pairs of rib bones, and in between the rib bones we have the intercostal muscles. Now these intercostal muscles are very important for the respiratory function. The lower limit of thoracic cavity is what? It is the diaphragm. We saw in the digestive system also, as well as the respiratory system. So the lower limit of thoracic cavity is the diaphragm. So with that, I will discuss how we inhale and exhale air. Let's study about the initial activity in the respiratory system. That is the gas exchange between external environment and lungs. So in that, we have two processes. One is inspiration, inhaling of air, and the other one is expiration, exhaling of air. So to understand this, before you go into details here, how can you understand the respiration process? You can stand straight or you can sit comfortably, and if you keep your one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach and try to feel, or if you just observe, when you take a deep breath, what happens? Then you will understand the process of inhaling and exhaling. When you inhale, you can feel that the rib cage is moving outwards and upwards. And when you exhale, it moves down and inwards. So there you can look at this diagram. Here this part is the rib cage and this is the diaphragm that is shown to you. This is the front view, this is the side view. And the blue color arrow denotes the air going in. So here we are going to inhale. So the air is coming in. So what will happen is the rib cage will move upwards and slightly outwards, and also the diaphragm will contract so that it becomes flat. You can remember the activity when the volume increases. So when the diaphragm becomes flat, here the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. When the volume increases, the pressure will decrease. And when pressure inside here decreases, air will flow in from the atmosphere. So from the sideways also you can see it's moving up and it's moving outwards. The diaphragm is moving down, that is it's contracting, and the curvature is decreasing. So the air will flow in. If we look at the process, during inspiration, air enters into lungs. So here air enters into lungs. The volume of the lungs increase. To increase the volume of the lungs, volume of the thoracic cavity should be increased. So that is what is happening here. How does the volume of the thoracic cavity increase? Intercostal muscles contract. So I told you all the rib cage moves outwards and upwards. That is possible because the intercostal muscles contract. Therefore, ribs move up and sternum moves forward. So upwards and outwards. The rib cage has to move as a whole thing. So for that to happen, the ribs move up and the sternum moves forward. At the same time, diaphragm contracts and reduces its curvature. The curvature decreases and the rib cage moves upwards and outwards because the ribs move up and the sternum moves up. So with that, the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. Due to the above activities, the volume of thoracic cavity increases. And with that, volume of lungs also increases. So then what happens? Pressure decreases. So air enter into lungs through the nose. That is the inhaling process. So although we feel it as we don't even feel inhaling and exhaling, but all this process is happening throughout the day, 24 hours a day we are breathing. So throughout this process is happening. So the same way we inhale air, we have to exhale air. We'll see how that happens. Expiration. So we inhale the air, that is inspiration, and now we have to exhale air, that is expiration. So here what will happen is when we need to give the air out, that is exhale the air out, you can remember from the activity also, the volume of the thoracic cavity has to decrease so that the pressure inside the thoracic cavity will increase. That will make the air to flow out. So that will be the exhaling process. So for expiration to occur, the volume of the thoracic cavity. So here you can see volume of the thoracic cavity. Again here there is a printing error in the book. Thoracic, Thoracic. So for expiration to occur, the volume of the thoracic cavity should decrease to reduce the volume of the lungs. So then only the volume of the lungs will reduce. How does this take place? Now you can remember earlier the ribs moved upwards and the sternum moved outwards. So the rib cage completely moves upwards and outwards. So here the opposite. The sternum will move inwards, the ribs will move downwards. So completely the rib cage will move inwards and downwards. At the same time, what will happen to the diaphragm? The diaphragm will relax. So because of that, the curvature of the diaphragm will increase. So now look at the diagram here. You can see in this diagram, students. Now this is the thoracic cavity. These are the ribs. So the ribs are moving down. Sternum is moving inwards. At the same time, the diaphragm is curved upwards because the muscles of the diaphragm relax. So because of that, you can see the volume of the thoracic cavity will decrease. If you look at this picture, here again you can see the sternum moving downwards, the diaphragm is curved upwards, and also the ribs are inwards, downwards. So because of that, you can look at the volume here. The volume is less. So because of that, the pressure inside increases and therefore the air is exhaled out. So that is the process. So for this occurs due to the following changes. If we look at the changes, the intercostal muscles relax. That is one change. Relaxing of the intercostal muscles, that makes the sternum to move inwards as well as the ribs to move downwards. So sternum and ribs move into its original position. So earlier the intercostal muscles contracted. So now they relax. Then the sternum and ribs move into its original position. The diaphragm relax and becomes curved. So because of that, due to these activities, the volume of lungs decreases. Thereby, gas inside lungs move out through the trachea and then nasal cavity. So that is the exhaling process. So can you all understand the inhaling and exhaling processes? What are the parts of the respiratory system that are involved? The diaphragm, intercostal muscles, the rib bones and the sternum. So all of these together participate and help the lungs to inhale air and exhale air. That is the first stage of respiration. Gas exchange between the lungs and the external environment. So then we will move on to the next one. Okay students, now we will see how the inspiration or the inhaling process and the expiration, the exhaling process takes place. And also you can see how the rib cage, that is the rib bones and the sternum together participate in this process as well as the diaphragm. So you can observe everything clearly. You can see here the blue color is the inhaled air. So you can observe the path and what happens within the respiratory system. So now the air flows through the trachea into the bronchi and the bronchioles. That is the process taking place here. Now you can see what happens to the rib bones and the sternum. And now the diaphragm as well. The curvature of the diaphragm changes. So here you can see when inhale, diaphragm becomes flat, curvature decreases. At the same time, the intercostal muscles help in the movement of the ribs and the sternum. Now when the air is being exhaled now, you can see what happens. Now it is the expiration process taking place. The ribs move downwards, sternum moves inwards. You can see the diaphragm, the curvature increases. Therefore, the pressure inside the lungs increases, exhaling the air. At the same time, the intercostal muscles help to bring the ribs behind as well as inwards and downwards. So that is the process of inspiration and expiration. So here students, you would have understood how the ribs and the sternum moves upwards and outwards, as well as the diaphragm, the curvature decreases during inspiration. And when the expiration process takes place, the diaphragm curves upwards, the curvature increases, as well as the ribs and the sternum move downwards and inwards. So because of that, the pressure inside the thoracic cavity increases due to the decrease in volume and air is exhaled out. So I am sure you would have understood that process now. Okay students. So now that you have understood the first part or the first stage of the respiration process, that is the gas exchange between the external environment and the lungs, we will move on to the next process where there is gas exchange taking place between the alveoli and the blood stream. So then the second step, the gas exchange that takes place in alveoli. So I told you all students, from the nasal cavity, air enters into the pharynx, then into the larynx, and from there it is the trachea. Trachea is the large tube that is coming from this part towards the chest cavity or the thoracic cavity. Then it divides into the bronchi, and the bronchi enters into the lungs, and there it divides into bronchioles. So this diagram shows the bronchioles starting from the bronchioles. So here you can see this is a cartilaginous structure, a soft bone-like structure. You all know bones and cartilages are connective tissues, the solid type connective tissues. So this is a cartilaginous structure, therefore it is somewhat flexible. And here you can see the blood supply to the lungs, that is inside the lungs. And then here you can see the bronchioles dividing into branches. And at the end of the branches, I told you all, there are sac-like structures which are known as the air sacs. This is something similar to a bunch of grapes. You can think of each grapefruit like an alveoli. And the small stems are the branches of the bronchioles. And the larger stem is like the bronchiole. So here you can see this is an alveoli, and that again is divided into small sacs, or what we call as air sacs. And around the alveoli, around the air sacs, there is lot of blood capillaries. So this is a blood supply, a network of capillaries are there around the alveoli so that there can be efficient exchange of gases. So now we will see what happens here. The inhaled air comes through the bronchiole and it has the oxygen. So the oxygen will be given into the bloodstream, and from the bloodstream, Earlier we discussed the waste products. That is the carbon dioxide, water vapor, all these will be given into the air inside the alveoli. So that is the gas exchange that takes place in alveoli. So the inhaled air finally reaches the alveoli through nasal cavity, trachea, bronchi and bronchioles. Up to this part. The oxygen concentration in alveoli is greater than that of the blood capillaries. So here oxygen concentration in alveoli is greater than in the blood capillary network. So when there is high concentration of oxygen inside the lungs, that is the alveoli, and less oxygen in capillaries, oxygen can easily diffuse out of the blood capillaries. Similarly, CO2 and water vapor, carbon dioxide and water vapor is in high concentration inside the blood capillaries. So here you can see similarly carbon dioxide and water vapor concentration is greater in blood capillaries. So they diffuse out from the blood capillaries into the alveoli. So exchange of both the components. Therefore, CO2 and water diffuse from the blood capillaries into alveoli, and that is how the gas exchange takes place. We will look at this in a little bit more detail. Air exchange between alveoli and blood capillaries. So here you can see, students, the alveoli is shown to you. You all know this is the respiratory surface because this is where the gas exchange takes place. So here you can see this is the alveoli, the sac-like structure, and here you can see there is a very thin wall. And around that there is a blood capillary. Like this, around the alveoli there is a network of blood capillaries. That is what we discussed previously. So here what happens is, the air inside the alveoli has a high concentration of oxygen, and that diffuses through the alveolar wall and the capillary wall into the blood flow or the blood stream. At the same time, here you can see there is a high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the blood vessels, that is the capillaries, and they can easily diffuse from the capillaries into the alveoli. In addition to that, water vapor also diffuses into the alveoli. So oxygen is added to blood, that is why we call it as oxygenated blood after it comes from the lungs to the heart. We will discuss that later. At the same time, the blood that was here that had more carbon dioxide will be given into the alveoli, so that carbon dioxide and water can be removed from the lungs with the exhaled air. So this is the main process of air exchange between the alveoli and the blood capillary. So here you can see oxygen diffuses into blood and carbon dioxide diffuses from blood. So the place where gas exchange between external environment and blood takes place is known as the respiratory surface. So then what is the respiratory surface? It is this alveoli. So here you can see accordingly the respiratory surface of the human is the wall of alveoli. This is something you have to remember, students. It is the wall of alveoli. And the gas exchange takes place by diffusion. This is the process by which gas exchange takes place. Diffusing means from here it moves into the bloodstream and from the bloodstream into the alveoli through the walls without the use of any energy or anything. From one place it diffuses to the other place. So this is the gas exchange inside alveoli. Now, we will watch a video where you can observe how this gas exchange takes place. Okay, students. So, here you can see this is an alveoli and you can see the very thin wall of the alveoli, and there are many alveolar sacs so that the surface area increases and they are highly vascularized. So, this is a capillary, like that there is a network of capillary around the alveoli. You can see the blue color, that is the blood containing more carbon dioxide and less oxygen. So, when the blood passes through, there is exchange. Carbon dioxide is given from the blood to the alveoli, the air inside the alveoli, and oxygen from air enters the blood. You can see here, these are the red blood cells. They take up oxygen. The hemoglobin present in RBC takes up the oxygen. Oxygen binds to the hemoglobin, and here you can see it's the oxygenated blood. So, now we will see how the process takes place. You can see the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So, this is possible because of the capillary network and the thin walls between the alveoli and the capillaries. Both have very thin walls. So, easily oxygen and carbon dioxide can diffuse from the alveoli into the blood vessels and from the blood vessel or the blood capillary into the alveoli. So, that is the process of gas exchange taking place inside the alveoli, and that is the second process. So, first we looked at the gas exchange between the environment and the lungs, then the gas exchange within the alveoli. So that now you have understood the two processes, I said the walls are thin and there is efficient gas exchange taking place. So for this to happen, we will discuss the adaptations of the respiratory surface for efficient gas exchange. Characteristics of a respiratory surface. What is the respiratory surface? The wall of the alveoli. The adaptations of the respiratory surface for efficient gas exchange are as follows. The first one is it has to be a moist surface. So, when it is moist, it will be permeable for gases. How? The gases can dissolve in that moist, that is water, and they can diffuse very quickly. So, that is the reason the surface should be moistened and permeable for gas exchange. Two properties. Then for the gases to exchange into and out of the alveoli, if there was a thick wall, that will take a longer time. So, the wall of the alveoli as well as the blood capillaries are very thin. They have a lining of epithelium. So, the surface should be thin for diffusion of gases. A larger surface area to exchange large volume of gas according to the needs of animals. How is this large surface area obtained? The lungs are there, those are two sacs. Inside the lungs, we saw the alveoli, the air sacs. That is to increase the surface. Instead of just having the lungs like this, if you have lot of air sacs like that, all these air sacs, that is the alveoli, increase the respiratory surface. Why? These are the respiratory surfaces. So, by having the small air sacs or the alveoli, the surface for respiration or gas exchange is increased. Surface should be highly vascularized. That also we saw in the previous diagram. Around the air sacs or the alveoli, there were a lot of capillaries, a network of capillaries. So that is highly vascularized. And in many animals, body cover acts as the respiratory surface and gas exchange through the body cover. Now, all these are seen in us, that is man. We have a highly developed respiratory system where we have all these parts that involve in the respiration process. But if you take a small worm, that also respires, there is gas exchange taking place. If you had observed the worm carefully, you would have seen the body of the worm is moist. It's like slimy. Why is that? Because the gas exchange takes place through the skin of that worm. So, the respiratory surface and gas exchange through the body cover. So, when I meant the skin, it is the cover, body cover of the worm. Through the body cover, the gas exchange takes place and therefore that acts as the respiratory surface. So, in us, the respiratory surface is the alveolar wall. But in other organisms, it can be the body cover. With that, I will move on to the next one. So, not only the adaptations inside the lungs, even the alveoli are adapted to have or carry out efficient gas exchange. The respiratory surface of human is the wall of alveoli and the adaptations of the alveoli for efficient gas exchange. You can remember how the alveoli was. So, I said when we discussed the diagram where there was gas exchange taking place, the wall of the alveoli has to be very thin. So, the first adaptation is to have thin wall of alveoli, and also you saw that it was a moist surface. So, that was the next adaptation, moist surface of alveoli, alveolar wall we can say. Then around the alveoli, for the gas exchange to take place, what did we have or what was there? A lot of capillaries. So, that means the alveoli are highly vascularized. So, the alveoli, or we can, alveoli are highly vascularized. And also, to increase the efficiency of gas exchange, there should be a large surface area. And how is this surface area increased? By having a large amount of alveolar sacs. So, that increases the surface area. Large number of alveoli or air sacs increase the surface area. So, those are the adaptations. You saw that the lungs, the bronchioles, everything, they also had adaptations. So, in addition to that, you can see the respiratory surface of humans, that is the wall of alveoli. That is also adapted for the efficient gas exchange. So, with that, we finished the discussion about the second process. Now, I said there are three processes. One is the gas exchange between the external environment and the lungs. Then the second stage was the gas exchange within the alveoli. Now we move on to the third stage. That is where cellular respiration takes place, and during cellular respiration, the production of energy. So students, you all have observed this structure before also. You know that the respiratory tract starts with the nasal cavity. Then we have the pharynx, the larynx, and then the trachea, and that divides into the lungs as bronchi. And these are the lungs you can see, and as I told you, the lungs are protected or kept within this rib cage. This is the sternum and the rib bones, and you all know how these rib bones or the rib cage, that is the rib bones and the sternum together, contribute for the inspiration and expiration process. So these are there throughout. The lung is contained within the rib cage. Even at the back you can see this is the vertebral column. So this is like a cover around the lungs. So that not only gives protection, it also helps in the process. That is the first stage of respiration. Now we will see what happens during this respiration process. That is the gas exchange between the lungs, that is this, and the external environment. And although you have observed the lung structure before as well, we can see it here clearly. So the third stage of respiration process, cellular respiration. So you all know students, we consume food so that we can get energy as well as the other nutrients needed for the function of our body. So from the food, glucose is obtained, and from the respiration process, we get oxygen. But if glucose and oxygen are there separately, you can't get the required energy. So to produce energy, the cellular respiration has to take place. So oxygen moves through alveoli, reacts with simple organic compounds, that is glucose, in cell. So oxygen and glucose are the substances that are going to provide energy to us during the process of cellular respiration. In this chemical reaction, energy is released. That is the whole purpose, releasing of energy so that the body can function properly. Therefore, respiration is the process of oxidation of simple foods to produce energy for biological activities within living cells. So here we talk about the cellular respiration. So cellular respiration is the process that produces energy for the biological activities within the living cells. You all know what biological activities are. There are many changes taking place. There are organelles within the cells. They carry out different processes. Those are biological processes. Then the system of our body also carries out different biological processes. Those are the biochemical reactions. Chemical reactions taking place within the living cell. So if we write the word equation for respiration, here you can see the two substances that are needed for this process or the reactants. We need to have glucose, and with glucose we need to have oxygen. And when they react, the products are going to be carbon dioxide, then we have water. In addition to that, energy is released. So the main reason for this cellular respiration is to produce energy, but when glucose is oxidized, glucose reacting with oxygen to produce the energy, we call it oxidation. So, when glucose is oxidized, carbon dioxide and water are produced as the byproducts. So, these are byproducts produced during cellular respiration. For the same process, we can write the chemical equation or the balanced chemical equation for the respiration process. You all know the chemical formula. What is glucose? It's C6H12O6 and oxygen is O2 gas. So, when they react, carbon dioxide, water and energy are produced. Now we said balanced chemical equation. You know how to balance it. There are 6 carbons. So 6 carbon dioxide has to be produced, 12 hydrogens. So therefore 6 water molecules need to be produced, and to balance oxygen, there are 12 and 6, 18 oxygens. Here there are 6, so we need to have 12 oxygen atoms there, therefore 6 O2. I am doing this because you know the way of balancing chemical equation. So C6H12O6 plus 6 O2 gives rise to 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water molecules and energy. So you have to remember what this cellular respiration is and the 2 equations related to cellular respiration. The word equation and the balanced chemical equation. So this is the basic cellular respiration process. For this we need oxygen. But sometimes we can inhale oxygen, there is enough oxygen in air, we exhale it properly and the proper cellular respiration takes place. That is known as aerobic respiration. But if there is not enough oxygen, then there can be anaerobic respiration taking place. Now we will see what these are. Aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. So aerobic means air, oxygen. When there is enough oxygen, it is aerobic respiration. The respiration that takes place in the presence of oxygen. So in the presence of oxygen is known as aerobic respiration. So there glucose is completely oxidized and a lot of energy is produced. But let's say even in our body, when you are doing lot of strenuous exercise for a long period of time, or if you are involved in a sports activity, sometimes you don't get enough oxygen, you don't inhale enough oxygen. Then there is not enough oxygen for the aerobic respiration to take place. Then the process will be anaerobic respiration. The same way, there are some organisms which can live without oxygen. So some organisms can respire without oxygen. So respiration carried out by organisms without oxygen is known as anaerobic respiration. It can happen to us when there is not enough oxygen, and it can take place in other animals as well as plants and yeast. So if it takes place in plants when there is not enough oxygen, anaerobic respiration that takes place in both plants and yeast cells is known as alcohol fermentation. We will see why. Normally in the cellular respiration process, there should be carbon dioxide, water and energy. So in this, instead of those products, it is alcohol that is produced. So therefore we call it alcohol fermentation. Similarly, the anaerobic respiration that takes place within animal cells is referred to as lactic acid fermentation. So you can remember the two words, alcohol and lactic acid. So those are the products during the respiration, anaerobic respiration process. And anaerobic respiration is called fermentation. So remember students, normally in our cells of our body, there is enough oxygen, there is aerobic respiration taking place, glucose is completely broken down and a high amount of energy is released. But if there is not enough oxygen, it is going to be anaerobic respiration, that is known as fermentation. And if that takes place in plants and yeast, alcohol is produced, therefore we call it alcohol fermentation. And if it is in animal cells, there is lactic acid produced, therefore the process is called lactic acid fermentation. Now we will go into a little bit more detail. Again, aerobic and anaerobic respirations. The anaerobic respiration that takes place inside these cells can be given by the following word equations. So here I will write the respiration processes here. So if it is in plants and yeast, then the products are going to be from glucose. Here we don't have to write oxygen. Why? There is no oxygen. So it's the glucose that is going to be converted to ethyl alcohol plus carbon dioxide and energy. But remember students, the energy that is produced here is less than the amount of energy that is produced during aerobic respiration. So this is the anaerobic respiration that takes place inside the plant or yeast cells. So when yeast carries out anaerobic respiration during fermentation, carbon dioxide and ethyl alcohol. So this is ethyl alcohol. So this process is an example for alcohol fermentation. This is what we call as alcohol fermentation in plants and yeast. Then we have the next one. In animals, including human cells, also perform anaerobic respiration. The anaerobic respiration that takes place within animal cells is referred to as lactic acid fermentation. So now we will see how this lactic acid fermentation takes place. So in animal cells, and human cells, we are going to write the equation for lactic acid fermentation. Now this again happens to glucose. So here also we don't write oxygen. Why? It's the anaerobic process. From glucose, it's going to be lactic acid and energy. So now you can understand the three different processes. Normally, when there is aerobic respiration, glucose reacts with oxygen, giving rise to carbon dioxide, water and a lot of energy. But in plants, when there is not enough or no oxygen, that is anaerobic respiration in plants and yeast, gives rise to ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide and a small amount of energy. The same way in animal cells and even human cells in us, when there is lactic acid fermentation, that is the anaerobic respiration, glucose will be converted to lactic acid and energy will be produced. So, those are the anaerobic respiration processes. So, we have discussed the third stage of respiration. Now, we will look at a few more examples. Have you faced an incident of muscle pain and cramp due to an instant activity like 100-meter race? So, this is actually a question to you all. I am sure most of you all have experienced this. All of a sudden, when you do a lot of physical activity or if you try to run a 100-meter race, what can happen? You can get cramps in your leg. The reason is the anaerobic respiration. When you do a lot of physical activity, for the movement of your muscles, especially the leg muscles, lot of energy is needed. So, to provide lot of energy, the cells have to carry out cellular respiration. But if you are not inhaling enough oxygen or oxygen is not circulated throughout the body and there is not enough oxygen in your muscles, then lactic acid fermentation takes place in the muscles. So, the accumulation of lactic acid causes the muscle pain and the cramp. So, that is the reason why you get this cramp and pain. If we answer this question, when, or we can say during instant activity, or you can say heavy physical activity, there can be less oxygen in muscles. Therefore, lactic acid fermentation, that is anaerobic respiration takes place. Accumulation of lactic acid in muscles cause the pain and cramp. So, this is the reason why you get the cramp and the pain. The same way, we looked at another type of fermentation. What is that? The alcohol fermentation. You have learnt in your previous grades where alcohol fermentation takes place. We take a vessel containing sugar. So, there alcohol fermentation. You have discussed examples before. Say you take a small container with sugar solution and you put yeast into it. And you can observe the fermentation process. You would have even done an activity where you take the sugar solution into a bottle and add yeast, then you fixed a balloon to it, and after some time you can observe that the balloon will bloat up. What is the reason? The evolving of carbon dioxide during alcohol fermentation, and you get a sour taste. The sour taste in this solution is due to the formation of ethyl alcohol. The same process takes place when they allow the bread dough to ferment. Now even to bread, bun and stuff like that, they add yeast, and there is carbohydrates in it, or they do add a little bit of sugar. So the yeast reacts with sugar, and that there is alcohol fermentation. So that is why the bread inflates or bloats up and it becomes soft. So there also alcohol fermentation takes place. So this is one example. Then during the fermentation of dough of bread, there also it is alcohol fermentation. So these are examples that you have learnt before. You need to relate it to this process. So now I am sure you have understood the different types of cellular respiration, the aerobic respiration and the two types of anaerobic respiration. So with that, I will move on to the next one. Here you can see energy produced during aerobic respiration. The energy produced during aerobic respiration is higher than energy produced during anaerobic respiration. I explained this to you all before. Why? During aerobic respiration, there is complete oxidation of glucose. So, more energy is produced. This is because of the incomplete breakdown of the glucose in anaerobic respiration and complete breakdown of glucose in aerobic respiration. So, here incomplete breakdown in anaerobic respiration and complete breakdown in aerobic respiration. So whatever the respiration is, there is at least a small amount of energy produced, and this energy is produced in a form of a certain molecule, and that is called the ATP molecule, adenosine triphosphate molecule. So here you can see energy is produced during anaerobic respiration as well as in aerobic respiration, and part of this energy is lost as heat. So here part of the energy is lost as heat. That is why our body also produces lot of heat. When you eat food, when you do work, when there is cellular respiration, there is energy lost. And rest will be stored in ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate as chemical energy. So here during the cellular respiration process, the energy that is released, it's converted to two forms. One is the heat, the other one is ATP. And this molecule, that is ATP, stores the energy in the form of chemical energy, and that will remain within our body. And whenever we do activities, not only us, even the plants, For their biological processes and all the activities, whenever there is energy required, the ATP will release energy. So, therefore, ATP has different functions. If we look at the functions of ATP, you can see here storage of energy. So, as energy is released during the cellular respiration, it is stored within the ATP molecule. And then release of energy. So, as I said, whenever we need energy, that will be released. And also, it acts as an energy carrier. Say from one part of the muscle to a different part of the muscle, or from one part of your leg to another part of your leg. If there is an energy requirement, ATP can carry that energy from one place to another. So, they act as energy carriers. So, there are three functions: storage of energy, releasing of energy when necessary, and carrying energy from one place to the other. Or during a chemical process also, they can act as energy carriers. So, that is how energy is produced at the third stage of respiration. Initially, there was gas exchange, oxygen is taken in, carbon dioxide and water vapor are evolved out. Then there is exchange between the alveoli and the blood capillaries, and finally the cellular respiration, which produces ATP. Now, we will see some more uses of ATP. Now, this is an extra knowledge. So, students, what we have discussed is what you need to know about respiration. In addition to that, you have to know this extra knowledge just for your understanding and extra information. The energy stored in ATP is used for the following requirements. So, when I discussed, I told you all when we do physical activities, we need energy. So, ATP releases that energy. Now, let's say I am talking to you all. I am moving my hands. You all do lot of physical activities. For during all these processes, the muscles of our body works. For the muscles to function properly, they need lot of energy. So, therefore, for movement of muscles, ATP is necessary to release or give energy. Then for active transportation, we have discussed different types of transportation processes before. Diffusion, osmosis, you can remember those processes. Similarly, there is active transportation which needs energy. Energy is needed for the transport of materials from one place to the other. So, for that, energy is provided in the form of ATP. Then there are chemical reactions take place within organisms. So, there are many different biological processes. So, you know that those processes are chemical reactions. So, during these chemical reactions, sometimes ATP needs to be used up. So, that is the chemical reaction. Then synthesis of complex compounds from simple compounds. You know what simple and complex compounds are. Example, amino acid produces protein. Amino acid is the basic structural unit of protein. So, that is a simple organic compound which produces the complex protein molecule. So, that also needs energy. Then production of new cells. What is the process that produces new cells? The cell division. So, during cell division also energy is needed. So, ATP will be used up there. Then this example, illumination of some organisms. You all know what fireflies are. In the night, I am sure most of you all of you all would have obviously seen fireflies, and you would have enjoyed when there are many fireflies flying around you with those tiny lights. So, there the energy that is needed to give this illumination, that is this bright color, what we see as the light, that illumination needs energy, and that is provided in the form of ATP. Similarly, now this is an electric eel. Now, electric eel produces electricity in order to protect itself from predators. So, for that production of electricity, they need to use energy. Generation of electricity in some organisms. So, this is an electric eel. So, these are the different uses of ATP. So, with that, students, I have come to the end of discussion on the process of respiration. So, you can remember the parts of the respiratory system and how they involve in the respiratory process, and the 3 stages of respiration, that is the gas exchange between the environment, that is the external environment, and the lungs. Then the gas exchange taking place inside the alveoli, and finally the cellular respiration process to produce energy. So here you know that we are inhaling air. So when we inhale air, there are a lot of other things present in air, like pollutants. There can be dust particles, there can be smoke, there can be microorganisms. Those are the pathogens. So all these can enter into our body. But you can remember, there are protective methods. What is that? The cilia inside the nasal cavity and the mucus layer. They prevent the entering of these particles, dust particles, pathogens, all those are given out, even the sneezing process, to give out all these particles. But still, even with all those protection, some of these pathogens and dust and other chemicals can enter into our respiratory system or the respiratory tract. That can cause different types of diseases. So now we are going to discuss the diseases related to the respiratory system. So diseases associated with respiratory system. The first one is common cold. So from the name you know that is a common disease and you know what cold is. Normally also there is mucus present in our respiratory system, inside the nasal cavity and inside the lungs. Why? To keep the alveolar sacs and the alveoli moist so that there can be efficient exchange of gases. But this mucus can get infected because of the infection to the respiratory system. So this common cold is caused by the virus, common cold virus. So you know this is a pathogen that causes cold. So this infects the respiratory system and what happens? You know the nose becomes red, you sneeze, you get a slight fever, you get headache, you can feel your ears and getting blocked, sometimes even your voice changes. So you are very familiar with this common cold disease. I am sure all of you all have experience also. So the symptoms of this disease are headache, sneezing, running nose and cough. So normally some people it is running nose. Some people the phlegm gets so infected, the system gets so infected, the phlegm becomes solidified. So you get a blocking of the nose. That is also possible. So when you have all these symptoms, you know that you have a common cold, you feel very uncomfortable, you do feel tired, but this is not a disease that you really have to be concerned about. And there is no medical treatment. Why? Because it is a viral infection. You all know normally viruses are not affected by antibiotics. So therefore there is no medical treatment as it is a viral infection. But how can you treat it? But can treat for symptoms. What do? You can inhale steam in order to release the phlegm, to remove or get rid of the blockage of your nose. So like that you can do treatment. By avoiding dust and mist-like conditions which are good for viral growth, we can recover quickly. So by avoiding dust and mist-like conditions. So you can either cover your nose, you can wear a mask, you can cover your nose with your hands or with a handkerchief, a tissue. When you know there is lot of dust in certain places, there is lot of dust generated. So by avoiding that, you can recover quickly. As well as there are many home remedies that you can use to recover from this disease. So that is the common cold disease that is associated with the respiratory system. Now I will move on to the next one, that is pneumonia. Now pneumonia is caused by a bacteria or a virus. So the causative agent of pneumonia is a bacteria or a virus. Two different pathogens can cause this disease. And here what happens is the lungs get infected. Because of that, there is a fluid filling inside the lungs. Normally, the respiratory surface has to be moist so that there will be efficient respiration. But here there is a fluid. Fluid means a liquid-like substance filling inside the lungs. Then it's difficult for the lungs to contract and relax. So therefore, it's difficult for the inspiration and expiration processes to take place. So you will have difficulty in breathing, inhaling and exhaling, or shortness of breath. So those are all associated to this disease due to the fluid filling inside the lungs. So the lungs are infected. Lungs is the part that is going to be infected, and a fluid may accumulate in the lungs. Prolonged cold and cough is a reason for pneumonia. So in the previous disease, that is common cold, I said you don't have to really worry about it because there is no medical treatment. It is a common disease. You can treat it easily and you can avoid it as well as get cure from it quickly. But if you neglect it, when you have a cold, you don't bother about it. You just go into a place where there is lot of dust. You neglect the disease. Then your lungs can get infected by bacteria or virus, and that can lead to pneumonia. So prolonged cold and cough. Cold and cough for a long period of time, and also mainly due to neglection. It is important to go for immediate medical treatment. So here we have to go for immediate medical treatment. The reason is if there is too much of fluid inside your lungs, initially if it is just the initial stage, it can be cured with medicines. But if there's too much of fluid inside your lungs, then it has to be sucked out by other processes. So that can be very difficult. So to avoid that, if you know there is prolonged cold and cough, and if you think that you have pneumonia or if you have fever, it doesn't stop for a long time, along with cold and cough, it's always better to get immediate medical treatment. So that is the second type of disease. Now we will move on to the next one, that is asthma. Now asthma is the inflammation that occurs in the body. Inflammation means when there is an allergic condition, your body reacts against that. That particular activity leads to inflammation. Now say when there are dust particles entering your body, entering your respiratory system, then there is inflammation. So it can be due to dust, pollen. You know what pollens are? They are present in the flowers. Sawdust, fur, smoke. So you all know there are different people allergic to these different substances. Some people have allergy to pollens. Some have allergy to fur, skin. The hair in animals, fur is the hair of animals. So they are allergic to that. Then if there is lot of smoke and also sawdust, that is from the wood. When you cut wood with a saw, you get the sawdust. So these are all very tiny particles which can spread through air. They are present in air, and when you inhale the air, they can get into your system. So those are the reasons for asthma. These are the causative agents. Now, so far the diseases were caused by pathogens. Here, these are the substances that cause asthma. Due to those substances, the bronchioles get inflamed and the cross area of them are reduced. So here the cross area is reduced. So you know the bronchioles, from the trachea there are branches, bronchus, and then they divide into bronchioles. Those are small tubes that provide the air into the air sacs or the alveoli. And here, if they get inflamed, they swell up, then what happens? The space between the bronchioles decreases. So air cannot flow in easily into the lungs. So again you have a shortness of breath. You feel difficult to breathe, inhale and exhale. And we normally call that condition as wheezing. You get a wheezing sound as well as it's difficult for you to inhale and exhale. So that is related to asthma. So difficulty in breathing with a sound, and also it causes a sound. So that is asthma. Now I will move on to the next disease, that is bronchitis or bronchiolar inflammation. So now you can see all the inflammations or infections are related to either the lungs, the respiratory tract or the bronchioles. So here it is the bronchiolar inflammation. So from the name you know it is to the bronchioles. The bronchioles swell up due to inflammations that occur by a viral or bacterial infection. So mostly it is the virus or bacteria that affect the respiratory system. And the symptoms are again heavy cough and difficulty in breathing. So always when there is inflammation, that is the swelling, the tract, if it is either the trachea or the bronchus or mainly the bronchioles, because they are the smaller tubes, smaller parts that supply the oxygen into the alveoli. So when they swell up, the space between them decreases. Therefore, there is not enough air supply to the lungs and the alveoli. So you feel a difficulty in breathing. You have to exert yourself to inhale and exhale. And in addition to that, other than bronchioles, even the larynx may get infected. And as a result, voice may not exit properly. Sometimes you can't talk, you will be talking but your voice will not be heard. That is during bronchitis or bronchiolar infection. So like this, there are many different conditions due to different diseases associated with the respiratory system. Next, we will see what tuberculosis is. We normally call it TB, tuberculosis. And TB is also caused by a bacteria. Tuberculosis is caused by a bacteria. Due to multiplication of the particular bacterium within the lungs, the tissues are damaged. And here, the disease is associated to the lungs. So, these particular bacteria, they grow inside the lungs and they multiply. And due to that, they damage the tissue. You all know the lungs have very thin tissues. Why? Inside the lungs only there are alveoli where gas exchange takes place. So, when those are damaged, the gas exchange will not take place properly. Mainly the lungs are infected, but it may affect other parts of the body. Parts of tissue can be released with phlegm. So this is something that can be seen. Now when you sneeze, when you cough, when phlegm comes out of your body either through the mouth or through the nose, sometimes you will see tissues coming with that. Even blood, the reddish color and the tissues are visible because it damages the tissues there. The lungs are deteriorated and get perforated. Now because the bacterium, it multiplies inside the lungs, it damages the tissues, it perforates. Perforates means it actually make holes, like perforations are holes. So holes or perforations appear on the surface of the lungs, and that is what we call as deterioration, damaging of the wall of the lungs, making holes there. And because of that, blood will release with phlegm due to breakdown of blood vessels. You all know the alveolar sacs are there. Around the alveolar sacs, there are a lot of capillaries. So when the bacteria affects the lungs, the wall of the lungs, not only the wall, even the alveolar sacs as well as the blood capillaries are affected. So because of that, blood can be released with phlegm. Phlegm is the solidified or semi-solid like mucus. After infection, it becomes the phlegm. So with that, blood can be released. So normally, with most of the diseases associated with the respiratory system, there is phlegm coming out of either your nose or your mouth. Now we will see the symptoms of tuberculosis. Release of blood during coughing. Why? The blood cells get damaged, blood tissues are damaged, and blood will be released. Fever, you feel very tired, tiredness, loss of appetite. You can't eat because there's so much of phlegm, you're so tired, you're very weak and you don't feel like eating. And there will be weight loss. Again, why? You don't feel like eating, that is one reason. The other reason is there is shortness of breath and there is no proper gas exchange. Because of that also you can lose weight. So all these are symptoms of tuberculosis. Now if we don't treat TB properly, it has to be identified correctly and treated properly, then there is no problem. But if we ignore it, it can become fatal. It is important to take precautions and vaccines to avoid tuberculosis. Tuberculosis can be cured by proper treatment. If we don't take proper treatment, then it can become a problem. So always, you don't have to overreact for any disease, for example like a common cold, but at the same time, you should not ignore and neglect any of these diseases, because respiratory tract is a very important system. All the systems are important, but this is also a very important system in our body. So we have to take care of that system. In addition to this, there are other diseases that are caused by smoking. So what we discussed before are all caused by pathogens, microorganisms. We cannot actually prevent them. But here, this is a disease associated to one of the habits, that is smoking. Smoking causes lung cancer, bronchitis and some other diseases. And also it can cause death. Now some people are addicted to smoking. When they smoke, they inhale the cigarette smoke. In addition to that, they give out the cigarette smoke into the environment. So if you are standing next to a person who is smoking, the person who is smoking is the active smoker. He inhales the smoke directly. But there is some amount of smoke coming from that person to you as well. Then you become the passive smoker. So active smokers have a high probability of getting affected by the smoke. In addition to that, even the passive smokers can get affected. Now, this is due to two main components present in cigarette smoke. One is carbon monoxide and the other one is nicotine. Now, like carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide is also an oxide of carbon, but that is somewhat poisonous and it has the ability to join with hemoglobin. You know the function of hemoglobin. Now, in blood, there are red blood cells. They are the ones who transport oxygen. We discussed that before. We saw how air is exchanged and how it combines with RBC. But here, if there is carbon monoxide in the inhaled air, if you are in front of a person who is smoking and that air contains carbon monoxide due to cigarette smoke, this is absorbed into blood. And this carbon monoxide actually competes with oxygen. It doesn't allow the oxygen to join with hemoglobin. It joins with hemoglobin. Carbon monoxide readily binds with hemoglobin and avoid binding of oxygen. So, it prevents the oxygen from binding with hemoglobin. Carbon monoxide combines. Therefore, carrying capacity of oxygen in blood reduces. Now, hemoglobin is the main component that carries and transports oxygen. If in place of oxygen, carbon monoxide is bound to it, then the oxygen cannot be transported efficiently. This happens due to carbon monoxide present in cigarette smoke. Similarly, I told you all there is nicotine found in cigarette smoke and this increases the heart rate temporarily. So, when the person is smoking and if the nicotine is being inhaled into the body, the heart rate will increase. But if it happens continuously, that can lead to a lot of health problems. Due to destruction of cilia in respiratory tract, so here this is another problem caused by the cigarette smoke. Because of that, cilia are destructed, they are damaged and there is lot of nicotine and substances, smoke accumulating inside your respiratory tract as well. When a person smokes continuously, all the smoke that goes into the body, it causes these problems as well as it deposits on the walls of blood vessels and the walls of all these respiratory tract. And it destructs the cilia of the respiratory tract. Bronchioles may swell up and get inflamed. It may cause difficulty in breathing. And as these epithelial cells exposed to cigarette smoke, they may form abnormal cells which develop into cancers. So, here you can see the cigarette smoke basically affects the whole respiratory tract. It destructs the cilia and it actually affects the bronchioles. Bronchioles swell up and get inflamed. Inflammation, swelling of bronchioles, and it can cause difficulty in breathing and also the epithelial cells exposed to cigarette smoke become abnormal cells. So, you all know normal cells, they undergo cell division, that is a normal process. But if the cells become abnormal and if there is abnormal cell division, they can develop into a cancer. So, that is why we said it can cause lung cancer, bronchitis. Here you can see the effect to the bronchioles, swelling of the bronchioles, and also other diseases like shortness of breath and all that, and it can become very, very fatal also. So, it is better not to smoke. If you are not a person who smokes, avoid being closer to a person who is smoking at that particular time. That is, avoid becoming a passive smoker. So, even passive smokers also get same harmful effects due to cigarette smoke. You shouldn't smoke and you should not get exposed to cigarette smoke to avoid all these diseases. So, this is a disease associated with the respiratory system, not caused by other organisms. So, it is due to smoking. Now, we will look at the next one, that is silicosis. Now, you would have heard about silicon. You know that is an element. Now, compounds containing silicon, normally they are known as silica, like silica soil, silica sand, and there are many other substances. So, when there are people, workers work in quarries, you know what quarries are? They dig out the stones, the other different types of quarries. Then there are people working in coal mines to dig out coal that is used as a fuel and is used for other purposes. Then glass industry, where they produce glass, cut glass, and even in construction sites where they use very large blocks of these different types of, not bricks, the different types of block stones. So, all these people are exposed to this silica. And when they inhale the air that contains silica, the silicon can enter into their respiratory system. So, workers work in quarries, coal mines and glass industries exposed to silicon containing compounds. And when these people inhale air with those compounds, they accumulate in the alveoli. That is important. Alveoli is the small sac where gas exchange takes place, and silica accumulates in the alveoli. Then the lung tissues get deteriorated gradually. This disease is known as silicosis. So, because they accumulate inside the alveoli, the lung tissues, that is the alveoli wall and the lung wall, all that get damaged, that is deterioration. And that condition again leads to difficulty in breathing, and it can become fatal as well, depending on the amount of silica that is present inside the lungs. So, you do need to work here. There are a lot of people working in these places, but they also need to take precautions in order to prevent silicosis. Similar to silicosis, there is another disease that is known as asbestosis. So, this disorder occurs due to inhalation of air containing asbestos particles. You would have seen asbestos sheets. Sometimes they use it for roofing. Now, it's not commonly used. In other earlier days, they used asbestos sheets for different purposes. So, from these asbestos sheets or asbestos containing substances, particles and fibers of asbestos can be released. And again, when you inhale the air, these asbestos particles and fibers enter the respiratory system. So, this disorder occurs due to the inhalation of air containing asbestos particles and fibers. Tissues of respiratory tract get destroyed due to accumulation of these particles. So, again, similar to the previous silicosis, here asbestos particles and fibers destroy the tissues of the lungs and the respiratory tract. So, that also can lead to many problems. So, those are the diseases associated with the respiratory system. We saw some diseases which are caused by pathogens. Then the disease that is the issues that are caused by smoking, and then the two disorders, that is silicosis and asbestosis. So you all know all the systems of our body are important, and respiratory system is very important because that is the process that gives energy for the function of our body. So we have to make sure that we take precautions in order to protect it. So with that, students, I have come to the end of discussion on this lesson, the process of respiration. I am sure you know the parts of the respiratory system and the three stages that take place during respiration and how the process occurs in different parts as well as their adaptations. And finally, the diseases related to the system. So now there is an assignment. Assignment: collect more information about diseases associated with respiratory system and preventive measures to prepare a small booklet. So as you know, students, respiratory system is very important to us because we inhale oxygen, exhale carbon dioxide, and that oxygen is needed for cellular respiration, which provides energy to the function of our body. So therefore, we have to make sure that we know the diseases related to the system. We should know how we can prevent it, and we have to take measures to prevent the diseases. So to do that, you need to collect more information about diseases. I am sure you know many ways. You can refer books, you can refer the internet, it gives a lot of information. You can ask from doctors if you know, they can help you out, even teachers. So like that, you can get more information. You can collect information even from newspapers, articles, magazines, books. So you need to understand the different diseases related to the respiratory system. Collect more information about diseases associated with respiratory system and preventive measures to prepare a small booklet. So once you do that, you will have a better understanding about the diseases and the preventive measures. So with that and with the discussion, I am sure you have a very good understanding about what the respiratory system is, the parts of the respiratory system, the processes that take place, the three stages of respiration, and how the respiratory system is adapted to carry out this process efficiently.